That is such a beautiful piece, both in the text and the music. Thank you. A very promising young man, 18 or 19 years old, a student at WSU, active in athletics with an academic scholarship, was dating his high school sweetheart. She was still in high school in Wichita. They had been together for some time and they were in love. Both sets of parents approved of their relationship, although they did realize that the kids were still pretty young. But then something went terribly wrong. The couple had consensual sex, and the police found them. Because the young woman was under 18, the WSU student was taken into custody. He was charged with a sex crime. And although the young woman's parents did not want to press charges, the trial proceeded, and the young man was found guilty. He served 5.5 years in prison, and today, although he has been released, he still carries the label of sex offender and felon. His college career was interrupted, and he was never able to return because he was no longer eligible for student financial scholarship. His relationships were forever changed. His life and his prospects for employment altered. His ability to function in the world forever tainted. He chose, however, not to be bitter, and he rose to the challenge by the time that I met him, but he still had to tell me as his minister that he could not attend church functions if children were present, since he was a registered felon and sex offender, even though his charge was with a consensual 17-year-old, not a child. I Google searched his record and I found that his story was true as he told it, and I cried at my computer when I found out what he had told me. His life was forever changed. We're continuing our sermon series today about building bridges. It's based on Latasha Morrison's book, Be the Bridge. And this week's theme is about empathizing and lamenting. Our traditional word for today is from Psalm 51. It's a psalm of lament. Now, to lament, as you know, is to express sorrow or regret. Lament is something that is the first step in creating a pathway for healing. We need to sit in sorrow for a time. Only after lament can pain become useful. For those who are familiar with the story of King David in the Hebrew Bible, you may remember that this enormously powerful man, a king no less, was desirous of a woman who was married to another man. He arranged to meet this woman, and he slept with her. She became pregnant with King David's child. And in order to take care of this dilemma, the king arranged for her husband to serve in the front lines of a battle and to die there. The king learned that his plan worked. But just as his plan worked, he also learned from a prophet that God was not pleased with his activity, and that his sin would result in the child Bathsheba carried dying. So King David wrote this psalm of lament for his sin, and he pleaded for God's compassion. This psalm is a public psalm of mourning, of confession, and of worship. So here are excerpts from Psalm 51 as our traditional word for today. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you and you alone I have sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified in your sentence and blameless when you pass judgment. You desire truth in my inward being. Therefore, teach me wisdom in my heart. Hide your face from my sins and blot out my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore me to the joy of your salvation, and sustain in me a willing spirit. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you have no delight in sacrifice. If I were to give a burnt offering, you would not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Last week I spoke about the need to listen to one another's stories when we encounter pain. And today I'm talking about the need to acknowledge and to lament when we encounter one another's pain. These are the spiritual processes that are clearly outlined in the Bible. Each sermon in this series will be about a spiritual process we can use in our personal lives or in the lives that we have as community members or as a nation. Last week, the truth will set you free, finding and listening to truth when we encounter problems. Today, acknowledging and lamenting when there is pain or confession. Next week, reconciliation, freeing ourselves from shame and guilt. Then we'll talk about healing in the fourth week and forgiveness after that, and then making amends, and finally restoration. This is the Christian story about how we can find our way when we come from a place of pain into a place of healing and restoration. As I mentioned, today's spiritual process is one of lament. There is even a book in the Bible called Lamentations about this very important process in our spiritual journeys. When King David's son did die, David wrote a psalm of lament. It's a cathartic process for him, and after his true lament, we're told that he rose from the ground, washed himself, changed from his grieving clothes, and then he went to the temple to worship God. That's what true lament does for us. It's a time of deep contrition that we must go through to prepare ourselves to reconnect to God and to others. We cannot continue until we have properly lamented. There is no shortcut to get to restoration and forgiveness until we have lamented. We can't skip lament when we grieve, or we will end up sarcastic, rebellious, anxious, maybe even depressed. This is a critical point, my friends. In my story about the young man who went to prison, how do you think he would have come out of prison if he had not spent some serious time lamenting his sentence and his situation? Let me tell you, if you have harmed someone in a serious, important relationship, but you have skipped over the lamenting process within yourself or with them, you will never achieve full reconciliation until you have lamented the sin, the problem that you encountered with them. You won't get to forgiveness and healing until you have lamented with them. Another story. In 1921, the Greenwood neighborhood was a modern, bustling area on the outskirts of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And during the great oil booms of the 1900s, many African Americans had moved to that area in hopes that the industry would bring economic opportunity to them. And over the following 2 decades, much of the local Black population in Greenwood moved there and settled because they were pushed out of the rest of the Tulsa area by racist municipal laws. Greenwood then became an area of sophisticated, highly educated, and prosperous Black neighbors. This community included a school system, hotels, cafes, modern homes with indoor plumbing. And many citizens in Greenwood were more successful than the white people in surrounding neighborhoods, which led, by the way, to some jealousy. The tensions actually grew between neighborhoods, and there were racial divides. Whites levied false accusations of rape and sexual advancement on white women. There were accusations of theft and other petty crimes. Lynchings were on the rise. And amid this tension, 19-year-old Dick Rowland, who was a shoe shiner in Tulsa, was accused of assaulting a white woman while riding the elevator at a downtown building where he worked. Rowland was arrested and then taken to the courthouse, where he was held to await judicial proceedings. The white community demanded justice by lynching, and they marched on the courthouse. The Black community gathered at the courthouse to protect Rowland and to ensure justice. Tensions were high, a few shots were fired, and the Black citizens fled to the Greenwood neighborhood. The next morning, the white mob descended on Greenwood. Buildings and homes were looted. Black men were lynched. Airplanes flew over and firebombed the neighborhood. This, by the way, was the first time in the history of the globe that airstrikes were made anywhere. At the order of the Oklahoma governor, the National Guard appeared and arrested more than 6,000 Black citizens from the area. Not one white person was arrested. By the end of the massacre, which lasted 2 days, over 300 African Americans had been murdered. More than 40 square blocks of homes had burned to the ground, and 10,000 African Americans were left homeless. Businesses were lost forever, and the once thriving community was desecrated by citizens, the police force, the National Guard, and governing agencies. It took 80 years before this massacre was ever acknowledged by the American government or the state of Oklahoma. 80 years. Like so many injustices, the Tulsa massacre has been intentionally buried in the archives of history. When we talk about America's racist history, it is important to apply the same rules of lament. If lament is a time of deep sorrow that prepares us to reconnect to God and to one another, let me ask you if our nation has truly lamented the sin of slavery and racism. If we have not, then we cannot move into a place of forgiveness and reconciliation. Have we looked our native brothers and sisters in the eyes? Have we listened to their stories, acknowledged their pain? Have we lamented what has happened to the reservations, to the land, to their ancestors, their traditions? Have we listened to the story of the people of Greenwood in the state next to us? And can we honestly say to our brothers and sisters that we have heard the truth and acknowledged this atrocious story and lamented with them about what has happened to their families, their ancestors, their sons and daughters? Because until we listen and lament, we cannot move forward. There are many people who are walking wounded and who have not yet experienced justice. Former prisoners, grieving parents whose children were murdered, women who make less than men, rape victims, people who have been hurt by violence, people who are old and feel forgotten, children whose parents have abandoned them. Until we lament and listen to their stories, they cannot move on. So what can we do as people who call ourselves Christian? We can look at what Jesus did. He stopped and he listened to people and their stories. So I would challenge you this week to take time to volunteer. Listen to someone who has a story. Whether it's on the phone so you can safely distance, or in person with your mask. And once you have listened, take time to lament. Read Lamentations. You can even look at the website associated with this book that we are studying, Be the Bridge. It's a fabulous website. There are some surveys on the website. Just Google Be the Bridge and read about starting a Be the Bridge group for reconciliation, for racial reconciliation. By doing any of these things, whether racism is an interest of yours or volunteering for CASA, court-appointed special advocate for a child, or some other tutoring at Gammon, or some other activity so that you can help someone in the community who has a story, you can make a difference in a person's life. Whether it's a neighbor, whether it's an older person in a nursing home, you can make a difference in someone's life. You will be a healing presence in our divided world. And who isn't for that? Who doesn't want and need that in our divided world? You have the opportunity to be the bridge. As Paul challenged the children today, sometimes we're here and another person is here. You can be the bridge between their lament and their hope. Be the bridge. by using your ears to hear their lament, leading them to healing, for it will be your healing too. Thanks be to God. Amen.